Well, hello everyone. Welcome to Quantum Nurse Freedom International live stream. And it's a beautiful, beautiful day and on my part, and I hope it is yours as well. Because today I have one of my favorite just as I said character, I mean favorite person and favorite wise elder. And because I love to talk to people much older than me, not because they're older, but because I would expect that they have so much wisdom to share. And that's just the way I like it. When even when growing up, they always tell me that I'm very good with elders. And so here I am. And again, if anything resonates to you in this conversation, please give a thumbs up, subscribe, share. And today I am most happy to introduce to you John Barbour. And John Barbour, it is his 91st birthday. And so happy, happy birthday to John Barbour. And not everyone could celebrate that year. So I think it is a blessing, and we have to celebrate every birthday, especially when you reach to this point. So, John, thank you very much for being with me on your birthday.
Well, that's one of the greatest birthday gifts I've ever had, Grace, is being on with you. I remember being on with you before, and I just adored being on with you. You look younger now than when we talked over a year ago. And listen, you don't dress like a nurse. So why do you call yourself Quantum Nurse, for God's sake?
Well, it's a great tagline, or it's a great catch, but I am truly a registered nurse, and until now, although I am somewhat retired, but I keep that nurse work in my heart and in my family, especially because once you're a nurse, you're always a nurse. And it's interesting because you mentioned about I don't dress like a nurse, and for many years I have a friend who said, "You never talk like a nurse." And I don't know. It just doesn't, I
And
just talk like a
listen,
nurse when I'm at the hospital.
you do not look like a nurse to me. And if you were really a nurse, I'd be sick every day. I'd be showing up there every single day. Um, a lot of people ask me at, 91 years of age, I have to call the fire department to get a permit to put 91 candles on the cake. And and I couldn't blow them up, so I had to use a hose. And um, I look at you and I think at how attractive you have become, and I think also of Jimmy Carter. Do you remember President Jimmy Carter?
Hmm.
Okay. Do you remember his comments after Gary Hart was one of the candidates for the presidency until he got caught in bed with Donna Rice? I don't know if you remember that
Yeah,
incident.
no.
Well, it did happen. Take my word for it. And people were asking, strangely enough, because, John Kennedy was an A type personality and did have a reputation for being with women other than his wife. The same thing was true of my idol, Jim Garrison. It is in a lot of male personalities, especially A types. Fortunately, I'm not an A type, but Jimmy Carter, who actually I had a show on Channel 13 in Los Angeles in the early 70s, and it was on my show that Jimmy Carter first announced he was going to run for the presidency. So we had sort of a nice relationship. But after the Gary Hart episode, a couple of reporters asked Jimmy uh, Carter how he felt about women other than his wife, if he ever thought about anything naughty. I mean, that was this really strange question to ask, but it was all over the news. And Jimmy Carter said that he had lust in his heart all the time. Okay. Now, At 91, I I don't have lust in my heart. I may have it in my mind, but it's an ancient memory where once upon a time it used to be in my body. But at 91 years of age and observing mankind, there are only, I get this all the time from people because they think I'm a little smarter or wiser because I'm not 91. I'm not smarter or wiser. I happen to not die. That's how I got to be 91. But the one thing that I do have noticed about nature is that nature is only interested in three things, and that's feeding and fighting and fornicating. And that humans feed and fight to fornicate. Well, I'm just down to the stage where I'm worried about feeding. and that's and that's it for me. So anyway, I am so delighted to be here with you again because the last time I had such a good time with you. So anything that you wish to talk about, I would be happy to talk about. If you want, I could start with one thing that's sort of in the news. You
Oh,
know that I live in Las Vegas, which is the gambling mecca and Vatican of the world. And in Las Vegas, you can bet on almost anything under the sun. And can you guess what the biggest bet is in Las Vegas right now? Just take a guess. Okay. Who's all over the news right now? And has been all over the news for years. Who's
for
all over?
years. Well, the president,
No, no. If you had said ex-president, you'd be right. That's all we hear about is Donald Trump. Okay, so he's on trial now, right? Right?
right?
Okay, so what do you think people are talking about? Go ahead, take a guess.
Oh, all about his past relationships.
No, not at all. They're talking about and taking massive bets on whether he or not he will take the stand in his defense, in spite of the fact that his lawyers might tell him to close his mouth. Well, if you've observed Donald Trump for the last number of years since he started doing all of this stuff, I bet on two things. As a hockey junkie, a kid born in Toronto, spent a lot of my time in a hockey rink, and that was my dream. And my Matthew Perry's father, John Perry, and I, and a very famous actor, started the celebrity hockey team, which is still going strong in Hollywood. So I bet on hockey games because they just started the uh, the National Hockey League playoffs, the greatest spectator sport in the world. And I often bet on hockey, and I can often lose as much of an expert I am. And over the past 30 years, I bet on every presidential election and won and never voted except once. And guess why I was able to pick who was going to win and who was going to lose? Can
And
you guess?
were you really able to?
Yes, absolutely. I wouldn't say that. I don't lie. Um, and it was quite simple. And it's not that I'm any political expert because I absolutely am not. I may be an expert on the life and death of John Kennedy and Jim Garrison's work, but I'm no political wizard. Okay, what I would do as a comedian, I would tell jokes about both candidates, and the candidate who got the biggest laughs was always going to lose, and that's how I predicted. I was one of the very first people to predict that Donald Trump was going to win the presidency, even though everyone in the mainstream media, if you go back, says that Trump is going to win. I mean, Trump is going to lose. Everyone in me, but in the alternate media and Facebook and and places like that, it was a different story. And when I did my jokes, it was always the one he was running against, Hillary Clinton or whoever it was, the Wicked Witch of the North. She got the biggest laughs and she lost. So I have bet a massive amount of money on the fact that Donald Trump, against the advice of his lawyers, is going to go on the stand in his self defense, because to try to get Donald Trump to close his mouth is trying to get Nevada hookers to close their legs. It is absolutely impossible. And I know that that's a bet that I am going to win. So that's my only comment about politics for the day. But I did write a very small protest poem that I would like to read to you about. To me, the world is getting worse. Uh, it just, and I'm sure to you and all of the people you know, it's it, it's just getting worse. Do you mind if I find this and read this thing to you?
No, but it's really gone crazy. Sometimes, John, I thought, okay, this will be a good topic for me, for whoever I will invite. But before I could even confirm that person, many more crazy stuff go happen. So it's like it's very hard to catch up. So I'm glad you're observant about those things. But go ahead, please read it. And by
Oh.
the way, you do look very handsome, yeah, with your shirt. Forget the 91. You don't look 91.
Well, I did get that. A number. I have a number of very, very bright friends, especially lady friends, and you see all these pictures behind me, and they claim that somewhere in a closet in my house is the real picture of me, and it's like the movie, The Picture of Dorian Gray. But this is this is me, and I feel absolutely fantastic. I think I'm going to live to be 103. Just
Okay. I
yeah.
can see that because you know how many 60 years old, 70 years old, 80 years old are somewhere in the nursing homes, or they're not
That's
gone, so
so true. Okay. Oh, and I got to tell you about a friend, because America. When I was 6 years of age, I was abandoned by my mother and father in Toronto. And when I was 17 years of age, I snuck into the United States and I was deported. Snuck in a second time. I was deported. I was deported again. And I didn't get my citizenship papers until 1977. And they were handed to me by Senator John Tunney. But America is not the America that I fell in love with as a kid when I haunted the movie studios and the theaters in Toronto. It is not even the country that I became a citizenship when I became a citizen, and John Tunney handed me my citizenship papers. It's an entirely different country and it's been going downhill since they murdered John Kennedy, which we might get. Oh, and I love that video that you played that we might play later. But this is because I am, I cannot avoid looking at the news because as a once upon a time comedian, my whole act was based upon the news. But now it's so difficult to look at. I find I don't even comment on it because I just don't want to waste my time doing that. But sometimes I do it in short poem because it's easier to digest. So I have this very short protest poem, which I'm sure everybody will recognize. So let's see if I get it here. Okay, here we go. Right, go. Oh, I started to tell you about this friend of mine who's in his 40s, and he was a computer genius, and he invented something that some other computer company bought for millions of dollars. So realizing that America was literally going down the toilet and it was being flushed repeatedly by thieving politicians, and the Bill of Rights and the Constitution went down the toilet a long time ago with George Bush when he illegally invaded Iraq. And he said the Constitution was just a goddamn piece of paper. So that's all gone. And the worst president of in the history of the United States, Bill Clinton. And this is not an opinion. I never express opinions. I only express facts because I can prove them. Bill Clinton literally destroyed America. George Bush destroyed Iraq illegally, an ancient culture. But Bill Clinton, do you remember NAFTA? NAFTA?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Tell your audience what NAFTA was.
Well, let them hear it from you.
Okay, NAFTA was a bill that was signed by Bill Clinton to send jobs overseas. Because the Vietnam War ended because middle class and upper class bodies of sons were coming home in bags, and the owners of the country said, hold, we can't have that happen anymore to us. So they decided they never again would have a draft. Well, they don't have a draft, but how do we have an army? Well, we make it impossible for young men to find jobs. Well, how do we do that? Well, we send the jobs overseas. How do we do that? We get Bill Clinton to sign NAFTA. And that sent all the jobs overseas. Okay. And then what else do we do? Well, we dumb them down in schools, which is, I mean, there's no more cursive. Cursive is handwriting. There's no more handwriting in schools, no more art, no more music. They are dumbing down American students. I know 3 bright young men, honor students at UNLV, who can't get a job and have to join the military in order to get an income. Have you ever heard of Glass-Steagall?
I heard about that, but I don't know the details. But talking about dumbing down in terms of arts, it seems like they've been doing it systematically. It's like the students who are not very critical in their observation didn't even realize. But I know a few people who, when they were in their like in their courses in arts, in architecture, they noticed something is off with the way they're being exposed.
Well, it's absolutely true. So they're dumbing them down. But Glass-Steagall was passed. The law passed by FDR and his socialist vice president. It was a law. That's when they created Social Security, which was a socialist program, by the way. Glass-Steagall would disallow Wall Street from gambling with the funds that they shouldn't gamble with, which were people's investments. That was repealed by Bill Clinton, which caused the 2008 recession. And I lost $1 million home on a golf course, and millions of people lost their homes because of Bill Clinton. But the worst thing that he did, you may not remember this, but when John Kennedy was alive, they had a thing called the Fairness Doctrine, and they had a thing called equal time. So that if I had, for example, I had Ronald Reagan as a guest on one of my morning show, and I'll have to tell you a cute story about that when I get back to my millionaire friend. And when I had Reagan on, I had to have a Democrat on. When I had a Democrat on, I had to have a Nazi on because he could get 5% of the vote. And if, as a film critic, if an artist or a filmmaker, a songwriter, a playwright read a really bad review by a critic, they could ask for equal time. I was the first one in America to review movies on television. And I'm the only one in America who's had a movie review ruled on by the Supreme Court of the United States over a review I did of Soylent Green. Now, remind me to get to that in a second, because I got to get to Bill Clinton. Because when Kennedy was alive, there were 1,500 owners of the media. The public owned the media. And in 1996, Bill Clinton passed the Communications Act, which put, when I say there were 1,500 owners of all the media, that's television, newspapers, you could not own more than 5 newspapers in the country, or 5 television, or 5 radio stations. Now iHeart has 1,500 radio stations, and none of them are local. They're all programmed in New York or Los Angeles. So in case of an emergency in Duluth, there's nobody there to report it. But Bill Clinton signed the Communications Act and put all of America's press into the hands of 6 corporations. So since Bill Clinton, there has never, ever, ever been free press in the United States of America. And the other thing that is total nonsense is this business of the trial of Donald Trump and all that's going on. Every talking head is talking about the threat to democracy in America. There is no democracy in America. The threat to these people that own the country, and it's not the people, is that democracy might one day return. It was shot down on November 22nd, 1963. Now I'm going to get to my friend who made millions of dollars selling his invention to some computer company. He sees that America is not the country he was born into or educated into, or the country that he made his millions of dollars into. So he searched every single country in the world. He was willing to go to China. He's willing to go to Russia, Romania, Serbia, wherever, or like Gauguin, to the islands far off in the Pacific, Gauguin the painter. And he couldn't find a country that he could go and live in. So he bought a boat. And he is now living in a boat that he calls his country. Anyway, I want to get to this little tiny poem here. Hang on a second. Here we go.
And I have this image of you and Reagan.
Oh, okay. Oh, okay. I'll tell you this. I'll tell you this quick story about Reagan, and I'll get to this little poem.
Yes.
He was running for his second term as governor of California. And Governor Reagan was always talking about the fact that the students at Berkeley who are growing long hair and not paying attention to their teachers were like the students in Rome that created the fall of the Roman Empire because they didn't pay any attention to their leaders. That was his big speech. He had it all the time. So he called to be they called to be a guest on my show over the Today Show because it was the most popular morning show in America. So he shows up with 5 or 6 guys in suits. And we're live at 7 o'clock in the morning for an hour and a half. And his press secretary comes over to me and looks down at my desk, which is blank. And he said, "Where are the questions for Mr. Reagan?" I said, "What do you mean, where are the questions?" He said, "Where are the questions for Mr. Reagan? I don't see them on my desk." So I point to my head. I said, "Well, they're on my head." He said, "Well, hold it, just a second. Hold it, just a second." So he goes back and he chats with Mr. Reagan. And Reagan nods his head in the negative like that. So he comes back to me and he said, "Mr. Reagan regrets, but if he doesn't see at least 12 questions that you're going to ask him, he's afraid that he will have to return to Sacramento and won't be on your show." And I said, "Well, that's okay." And he stared at me. When he said, "What do you mean it's okay?" And I said, "This is a live show. We have open telephones. So you can tell your boss he can take a walk back to Sacramento. I am going to open the phones and I'm going to tell the audience just what happened. That your governor wouldn't come on because I didn't have prepared questions. Open the phones and see what people have to say about that. So he rushes back to Reagan, and Reagan rushes up to me and he grabs my hand. That's when this picture is taken. And he says to me, John, I have no idea what's going to come out of my mouth or your mouth, but this is going to be fun. It was by far the best interview he ever did because the camera loves the man. But if you try to capture his personality and belief, it's like trying to shovel smoke. He did not exist. He was like Cary Grant. The camera just loved him. And I remember afterwards looking at the video, and I told my staff of 4, this guy's going to be the president of the United States. And they said, no way. He's just an empty suit. And I said, no, the camera loves him and fills that suit. But this is the question that I wanted to nail him on. I said, and that's the time we were in Vietnam, and he was all for it. And I was all against it, but because of the fairness doctrine, I could never say I was against it. I had to keep my mouth shut. So this is the only way I could say that. So I said to him, Mr. Governor, up in Berkeley, you keep saying these students with the long hair who are protesting against the war and against their teachers and against our government are the same kind of students that brought down the Roman Empire. And he said, absolutely. And it's going to happen to this country if we don't stop them. I said, well, did it ever occur to you that maybe the students in Rome were protesting their teachers and their leaders because they were fighting a fake war in a country where they should not be, which was Palestine? And I thought I had nailed him. But that he ignored it, and he just kept going on and on. He was the Teflon politician. Everything just rolled right off him, and indeed he did become president of the United States, and also he continued to be a fan. Now let me see if I can. Yeah, and also we'll get to this book. It's called The Greatest Reviews I Ever Read, because I mentioned to you I was the first one to review movies in America. I'll chat about this in a minute because this led to my becoming Frank Sinatra's private writer for 4.5 years. And in essence, it also led in a way to Real People, which was the most original, most successful show in the history of American television. Anyway, let me get to this little poem. Hang on a second here. Why am I having a difficult time? I am thrilled you are letting me do this, by the way. Just thrilled. Okay, here we go. Very scholarly. Okay, here's a protest poem. Oh my, what kind of hopeless, heartbreaking world are we now living in? It seems no matter where I look, from politics to religion, I see nothing but sin. And JFK's, oh, God damn phone. Pardon me for cussing there. Where did it go? Oh, this happens all the time. I hate this technical stuff, Angel.
But the cousin was like appropriate for the poem too.
Yeah, okay. Here we see. And JFK's pathetic family, besmirching his plans of peace, have become a waste of time by supporting a silent Biden who supports madman Netanyahu's continuing war crime. See, I don't like to talk about politics, but that is the truth. I mean, Biden, they just passed $1 billion worth of bills that is sending money to the Ukraine and continuing to arm Israel. It's just horrifying. And I have a lot of people asking me, well, Bobby Kennedy Jr., he is an alternative to that. And would you vote for him? And the answer is no, because on the 50th anniversary, I had arranged my very first film with Jim Garrison, which was called The Garrison Files. A film that should have won an Oscar, was deprived of an Oscar, but won the San Sebastian Film Festival Award, seen by millions around the world. That was the first one I made. I had arranged to show that at the University of Nevada, right here in town. Do you know the name George Knapp?
Um, I just heard about him, but
Well, George Knapp is the last great investigative journalist in America, and he's on the local Channel 8 here in Las Vegas, which used to be CBS. He has probably got one of the most successful sites in the world. As a side to that, he is the Sunday night host of a show called Coast to Coast. Their weekday host is a guy named George Noory, who is the dullest, most boring human being in the world, who used to be with Naval Intelligence. And George Knapp single-handedly saved the Garrison tapes, because 10 or 15 years ago, nobody wanted to see it. And George heard about it. He looked at it, and the day after he looked at it, he had me on his radio show. Okay, so I was a regular on his radio show. Everybody got to see the Garrison tapes. Okay, so in any event, on the 50th anniversary, when everybody was now ignoring the memory of John Kennedy, I called George, and because I had read that in a opera house in Dallas, Bobby Kennedy Jr. had said to the interview that his father did not believe the Warren Report, did not believe the Warren Report at all, and believed that the CIA had killed his father. But he said it in private, okay? So I called George Knapp, and I said, hey, listen, if I can get Bobby Kennedy Jr. to come to UNLV, will you interview him? And if I pay you $5,000, that is a shot of Bobby Kennedy Jr. after Bobby Kennedy when he was shot. And we will get to that in a minute, because Thomas Noguchi, the coroner, was the one that proved beyond a shadow of a doubt with his autopsy that the bullet entered the back of his head right here. He was shot by Thane Cesar, the security guard. Sirhan was 6 feet in front and firing blanks. And the reason he was firing blanks, because if he fired real bullets, he would have killed one or two of the assassins who were behind Bobby. So get rid of that. And let me get back to what it was I was talking about, if I remember it. What was it?
George, you were mentioning about George Hamilton.
George Knapp. Okay.
And George Knapp.
Okay, so George Knapp, I said, if I give you $5,000, would you interview him? And he said, God, no, John. He said, that's history. I'll do that for nothing. Are you kidding? And I said, oh, good. Then I can use that to help pay Bobby. One of my closest friends at the time is a great writer by the name of Dick Russell. He wrote a wonderful book about the murder of John Kennedy called The Man Who Knew Too Much. It is an outstanding book. I could tell you about the story about the guy that was the alternative of Oswald, but we might get to that in a minute. So Dick Gregory was writing all the environmental stuff for Bobby Kennedy. So they were close friends. And I spoke to a guy named Sean Lawton at the Kepler Agency, who was Bobby Kennedy's speaking agent, who was now one of my closest friends. And he said, Bobby would probably do it for $25,000. I said, okay, I have $25,000 left. My wife said, oh, it's historic. You better spend our last $25,000 on Bobby Kennedy. We'll give him $10,000 down and $15,000 when it's over. So At first, he agrees to do it. And then the school turns over everything to me. They are so honored. Bobby Kennedy Jr. is coming to their school to put the school on the map. I get the theaters, I get whatever I want, editing facilities, everything. And at the last minute, and they gave us a list of 1,200 people who were going to pay and wait in line. And George was going to interview them. And then they were going to introduce the movie, the Garrison tapes, which would be just unbelievable. But Bobby Kennedy, he asked to see the film. So I sent it to Dick Russell, and Dick Russell sends it to his friend, Bobby Kennedy. And I wait 2 or 3 weeks. Now we're coming down to the deadline. And I call Dick and I said, hey, listen, we have to go ahead with this and secure this. I mean, because the school is going to a lot of expense and trouble, as am I. So he calls Bobby and finds out Bobby does not look at the film and says that Jim Garrison is a kook. So anybody, I mean, in the Kennedy family, for God's sake, who was afraid to look at the truth of who murdered, I mean, in his case, his uncle, the greatest president of the United States since Thomas Jefferson, is nobody that I am going to vote for. So what I'll have to do again is just boycott the elections, because there is no one worth voting for in this country. The system is just too goddamn corrupt, and it's getting more corrupt every single day. And honest to God, I see, when I came to this country, Grace, I could name you 50 outstanding people. They were Barry Goldwater, probably the brightest Republican politician ever, who couldn't even get in the Republican Party today. They'd probably call him a socialist. Bishop Fulton Sheen. I'm an agnostic, okay? And I was a comic, so I love Milton Berle, the #1 show in television. And along comes this Catholic archbishop and knocks him off the television. And I become a big fan of his because I love storytellers. And he told stories about the Bible, okay? I can name 50 people like that. I can only name one now. And you never hear from him. And guess who that one is? Ralph Nader. Ralph Nader is 91. He is my age. He has the same energy and drive and love of the original America that I have, and he can't get a voice anywhere on television. I think he was on some public radio show the other day, and he was beyond brilliant, but it sounded like ancient history when he talked about an America that was America, the golden years of America. They're gone, and America's gone. They're all gone. Listen, they're all gone. We have to.
That sounds very gloomy. What's going to happen now, especially for the young people? You know, I can agree with you that it has changed so much, but we need to find a little bright side there. Don't you think? Although I am with you when it was so sad when I heard about that, was that 61 billion, and when they were chanting right in the Congress when they voted for that 61 billion.
Yeah, and I'll tell you something else. About 8 years ago, I did a really funny open letter to, oh my God, the Senator Harry Reid. And I blasted Harry Reid for 2 reasons. They were sending $30 million a day to Israel. This was 8 or 10 years ago, and not a nickel to Palestine. But that wasn't the problem. The problem was that I named 22 dual citizen Israeli Americans, not American Israelis, but Israeli Americans who were part of the neocon force that talked George Bush into fighting Israel's war in Iraq to get rid of Saddam Hussein, and who are making foreign policy decisions for Americans and public policy decisions for Americans. When Teddy Roosevelt 100 years ago said only 100% American citizens should be serving in the government or making policy, foreign or domestic. And so I named them all. And I said, I can't name one Irish American. I can't name one Canadian American. I can't name one Russian American. I can't name anything. They're all Israeli Americans. And I just hammered him. And a couple of congressmen sent me a note and said, you may have just gotten Harry Reid fired. Now, within a week, there were 100,000 views of that. And within minutes, I had 5,000 friends, which is the maximum. I never looked for a friend on Facebook. They just popped up, and I ended up with 5,000 friends. So it was up there until a year ago. And then a year ago, I get a note from Google. And they said, you are going to have to take down your open letter to Harry Reid because it is now against our community standards. So I sent them back a note and I said, well, what are your community standards? And they just said, our community standards are being violated by that, so take it down. So obviously, I took it down because it had already seen, 500,000 views. Who else is going to see it? And Harry Reid was gone from the Senate, and unfortunately, they renamed the airport here the Harry Reid Airport. But I'm discouraged in one way, but I'm encouraged in another way, Grace, because there are so many people like you on this alternative network. You are not mainstream media whatsoever. And there are hundreds of Graces, even though you're totally unique. A lot of them don't speak up, but many of them do speak up. And pretty soon that will bubble to the surface. The truth is like an air bubble under the water. It could be in a swamp, but will rise to the top and burst, and we will see the truth. And the greatest thing that anyone, I said, when COVID hit, I said, you're going to see a great rise in suicides. You're going to see a great rise in family fighting. You're going to see a great rise in suicides. I already said that. And in divorces. Because in order for a family, when I was younger, now I had an absentee mother who worked as a clerk in Woolworths, and she had 3 children. She was able to work that job and pay the rent of the house and raise a family. And a man could work in a corporation and buy a house and raise a family. But they can't do that anymore. In order to get by in America today, the mother has to go to work, the father has to go to work, and teachers who are underpaid spend more time with their children than the parents. I mean, there isn't a teacher in this country who should not be getting $150,000 a year. Not one. They should be getting the highest pay possible because they have become substitute parents. I have hope because I do see a lot of very bright people like yourself. But there's going to have to be a radical change in this country. And I don't know how that change is going to happen, and I may not live to see it. But if it doesn't happen, America will die long before Johnny Barbour does.
That's really too sad. Very, very sad. But yeah, there are good signs, and that's why it gets more crazy because they said when things are being out of control or the hegemony that who wants to control the United States and you know and the rest of the world when they cannot fully control or they that things that they want to happen is not happening, then that's when all else will be going crazy for us. So that's the good thing. That's right. It's so I see that there, and yeah, even in New Jersey, the New Jersey may be just a small state, but the parents don't stop really fighting for their children in school boards, running for school boards, and just being out there. In fact, this afternoon there's a community meeting again, and for a candidate who wants to know. So even if we are not sure about what's happening with the election, this candidate wants to know what we think. So I guess in a way that's good. Yeah.
Okay, so the other thing I want to uh, read to you is about free speech, and the only place that you could find real free speech. Uh, do you mind if I read that to you?
Yes, yes. But before you read that, I just want to let you know also that that's why I had to change my Facebook because the other Facebook that was taken down already. So right
Oh,
now I
hey,
don't.
hey, why would they take down the Facebook of a very beautiful nurse? Why?
Well, I became so beautiful. So so now they have I'm just kind of restarting, but I'm not doing Facebook in terms of like streaming. So
Hey, maybe Zuckerberg is actually a trans, and you were a threat to him.
Uh, so yeah, yeah, it's always there that they always play games, and but you're right. Even if, and I don't even care about how many followers, or as long as I can reach out to one person or two or three, and then that's it. And at least in my conscience, I'm doing something really good for my own self and for my community and then the rest of the world. And hopefully, just like you, I may not see the efforts, I may not see the outcomes of what I've done, but at least I know when you're confronted in your next life, you did the right thing.
Well, because a lot of people, uh, my friends, tell me they're very grateful for me because I express free speech, and I have a number of people who are better writers than I am. And Joe Satilli, a friend of mine who used to work for PBS, has one of the greatest, most independent newsletters in the world. And I have really smart friends all over the world. Imagine, and one of the smartest friends I have is a lady in Serbia. Her name is Alexander Miltic. She knows more about movies than I do, and she's a third of my age, and she began reviewing them when she was 6 years old. And if you go to my Facebook page when we're done, you'll see the comment that she made about me. And she posted my very first appearance on the Merv Griffin show. I mean, she's an absolute gem. Anyway, these people want to know where they can find some free speech. So this is what I wrote. And some of it's a little naughty, but it's not bad. Okay, hang on a second here. Where is it? Oh my God. Okay, here we go. Uh, it's called T-shirts, toilets, bumper stickers, and panties. That's what it's called. These four places above are the only places left in America where you will find the greatest witty expressions of free speech from clever, repressed people of all sorts. Red Fox, my lifelong show business friend and mentor, said, "Did you know that Red Fox was my mentor when I became a comic?"
I heard about that.
Yeah, he was my lifelong friend. And the first show I got, entertainment show, I put him on. Um, his real name is John Sanford. And people were afraid to put him on television because he did these filthy party records. But I knew him, and he was really, really witty. I mean, he said, when I told him about Jim Garrison being a hero, he said, "Heroes ain't born, they're cornered." Yeah, that's so true because Jim Garrison believed the government until he ran into Congressman Hale Boggs, the only dissenting member of the Warren Commission. So anyway, and he was my only lifelong friend was Red Fox. And the stories about him in my book, Your Mother's Not a Virgin, are hilarious and classic, especially the difficulty I had when he wanted me to be on the roast of him on Dean Martin. But anyway, let me get back to this thing here. God, I love talking to you. I'm so sorry I can't stay in one spot. Okay, here we go. Okay. Red Fox, my lifelong show business friend and mentor, said, quote, "If you can read the handwriting on the wall, you're in a toilet." Unquote. The wonderful cat picture here on a t-shirt I saw in a terrific embroidery shop on the Las Vegas Strip and sent copies to 3 women whom I knew would wear it and love it. And I'll show you or describe that to you in a minute, Angel. I have one myself. Back in the day when the Friars roasts were stag, I was on the dais to do Sinatra. Before I got to him, I knew there were 2 people he hated, Rex Reed and Anita Bryant. I won't tell you my Killer Reed joke. It is just too filthy, not fitting the clean cut guy who created real people. But I said of Anita Bryant, quote, "When I was on the Dean Martin show last year, I accidentally stumbled into her dressing room and saw her putting on her panties, which looked like they had writing on them or semen." That was a huge laugh. I apologized profusely and started to back out. And she said, quote, "Oh, no, John, that's okay," as she continued to put them on. And I could see that she really was what she always claimed to be, which was a lady from the South. Then there was a long pause, chuckles. Then I said, "The panties said, whites only." The biggest laugh and applause of the night. And when it was over, Francis Sinatra grabbed me, quote, "Johnny, God damn it, why didn't you give me that joke? That's what I pay you for." I said, "Because, Francis, you sing better than I do. I tell jokes better than you do." That was the biggest hug I ever got in my life. But back to today in panties. I don't see many funny bumper stickers anymore or t-shirts and stay out of public toilets. But today I saw a handful of hilarious printed panties in my fabulous embroidery shop. A couple I can only tell you about, a few others I will show you and comment on. I asked the unbelievably creative manager if some of them were filthy. She said, absolutely not. She said, you find those on Amazon or eBay. Since I'm there about once every 2 or 3 months for something really cute, only on a t-shirt, I asked her if she could show me a few and what was the one that made her chuckle the most. She laughed out loud and said, "Oh, John, that's easy. An 80-year-old charming man wanted a pair of panties for his wife of 60 years, just one pair that would say it all. I keep a copy in my drawer." She opened the top right-hand drawer, held it up, and the panty said, "For peeing only." I asked her what two were the most interesting, and she said her favorite was the one for a writer that says, quote, "My mind is more fun," unquote. Then added, I love that because I remember reading somewhere, win a woman's mind and her body will follow. Then she showed me another one saying, I don't understand this at all. Some older man ordered it and left it here, paid for it and didn't pick it up. I said, wow, I love it because only a few people on the planet knows what it means. She said, what does it mean? I said, is your grandfather or great grandfather alive? She said, no, why? I said, too complicated. Thanks for the chuckles. Bye. See you soon. She said, do you want them? I can't sell them. You can have them. I paused and I said, well, I can't wear them, but I think I will frame them and put them on my office wall, which I did, which is what I did and where they are. The reason I do such a silly thing, when I was a kid in Toronto in the 40s, following America's horrible depression, and then moved down here during America's horrible, horrible McCarthy area, I heard that cry a million times after the revolution. Even in one of my favorite movies and the best movie ever made about the Russian Revolution, Warren Beatty's Reds, I chuckle when I look at it on my wall and think any guy who bought this for a girl was sort of insulting her because there is no way in this criminally, corporately controlled world there will never, ever be any such thing as a needed revolution. So, if he expected it to be worn by some woman, he is telling her she's never going to get laid again. Probably why it wasn't picked up. I know two very progressive, very funny, smart ladies back east, one in Boston, one in Tennessee, both married with children, who would possibly at some point during Halloween or Christmas or April Fools wear such panties, and after my fantastic, funny mind of her own niece, Catherine, who claims to have inherited my warped genes, a very, very successful real estate broker in Colorado, as well as one of Colorado's best known show horse riders, reads this. It would not surprise me when she shows up at South Point next week to see me for dinner that when she walks in, she says, hi, Uncle John, and raises her skirt to show me something that said Broncos only with a standing ovation from a room full of cowboys. Now, you may not be able to see it, but here's a picture of a cat. You go to my Facebook page, and it's a cat that's saying, let me check my give a shit uh, thermometer. And as a result of this, hundreds of ladies, not men, but ladies, ordered that t shirt. And of course, there are the pennies, one that says after the revolution and my mind only. Anyway, pardon.
Thank you for sharing that. That's quite funny. And you now triggered me to search on, if there's really such a thing, what you described. I'm gonna look at those things too, just for crazy things. But that's nice that if you can read what's on the wall, you're in the toilet. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
That makes sense, right? You know.
You
Yeah.
know, there in this book, Your Mother's Not a Virgin. This by far, honest to God, Grace, is the best book ever written about anybody in show business. Donald Jeffrey. Have you ever heard of Harlan Ellison? He
No.
was one of the greatest writers in America, along there with Ray Bradbury and Nabokov. One of the greatest science fiction writers. Um, he he was one of my biggest fans, and he wrote a short story called The Terminator, which was stolen by Paramount and turned into that movie with what's his name, the Schwarzenegger, and his wife, his agent, his publisher, and his manager said, don't sue them, don't sue them, you'll never work again. And he said, the sons of bitches, they stole my work, I'm going to sue them. They said, please listen, Harlan, you will never ever work again. He said, well, I'm going to sue him. He sued and won. And there was a music store on Sunset Boulevard in La Cienega, and over it was the biggest blackboard in Hollywood or in Los Angeles, usually advertising rock singers. And he took out an ad that said, I beat the bastards. And he never stopped working since. Well, he was one of my very first guests, aside from Red Fox on the show. He couldn't wait to write the opening to my book, which might have made it a bestseller because everybody knew Harlan Ellison.
Tell the people again the title of that book, because I don't think you gave me the cover.
Okay.
My mother is not a virgin, right?
Yes, and it came out of a conversation with Jim Garrison, which I'll tell you about. That's where the title came from. And it is every few pages is a fantastic read. For example, I was the first host of The Gong Show, and it is a hilarious 5-page story. So you don't have to go through all of this. You just go to the Gong Show thing and you can read it. Have a great, great laugh. And
you have another book, though, right? This one?
This is not a book. This is a comedy album based on my reviews called I Met a Man I Didn't Like. And the liner notes were done by Neil Simon, America's greatest comedy writer. They were done by Burt Reynolds, who was one of my lifelong friends. The female comedian who died. God, what is her name? Outrageous comedian. And Paul Williams, Joan Rivers. That was a comedy album. I have 2 comedy albums. The other one that's called It's Tough to Be White, which is funnier today on my site than it was in 1966 when it was released. And the liner notes are by Dick Gregory, and they're unbelievable. So, but we'll talk for a minute about some of the stuff that's in this book. This book is written by a lady named Carol Haig, who has 6 successful novels, fiction novels out. But she was the one who edited this book. And she was stunned to find out that I was a film critic. And she called one day and she said, well, you wrote for 10 years for Los Angeles Magazine. You were on NBC for 5 years where you won 3 Emmys in a row for that. You're the only one that has a review ruled on by the Supreme Court, Soylent Green. Since I mentioned earlier, I will give you the punchline to that. She said, do you have any copies of your reviews on video? And I said, no, they destroyed them. She said, oh, God, what a shame. Oh, and then she said, what about Los Angeles Magazine? Because I read, and Stu Shostak. Stu Shostak is my webmaster, thank God, and saved my life and my work after a Trump follower destroyed all my previous work here. But I don't want to get into that. Anyway, Stu Shostak is the only one in America who preserves classic television, and he preserves hours and hours and hours of mine, because the most classic television, of course, was the one I created, the most popular show in America, which was Real People, that did more good for America in 3 years than 60 Minutes did in 30 years. So I didn't know where my reviews were. And my wife said, well, honey, you got a bunch of boxes in storage. Why don't you look at one? Well, serendipity, the first box I opened had the 10 years of all my reviews. She said, God, will you please send them? Will you please send them? So I sent them. And she said she laughed so hard, so often, she wet her pants. And she said, I've never done something that's real except your autobiography, which I love. Do you mind if I write a book about your reviews? I said, no, not at all, as long as I don't have to write anything anymore. I'm all written out. It's all in my book. And she said, but I have to do long interviews with you. And I would include those interviews in the book. We're going to get to one of those in a minute. I'm going to sing the title, Your Mother's Not a Virgin. When I was on the morning show in 1970, a show that I got by accident, by the way. And the reason I got it by accident, because as I said, there's such a thing as the fairness doctrine. There were 20,000 Chicanos protesting in Los Angeles against the local ABC station because they had no representation. They were also protesting downtown. So they wanted some representation. They wanted to get rid of the ABC, get rid of the cartoons, get rid of the movies, and do something related to Chicanos. So ABC decided that they were going to dump all that stuff and they were going to do a 90-minute live news show. And everyone knew that Mario Machado would be the one to be the host of the show. Mario Machado, one of the most handsome men in the world, should have been a movie star. He was born in China. He spoke 5 different languages. Of course, Spanish was his main. He was everybody's ethnic. That was my big joke about Mario. Anyway, I'm on stage at the Ice House breaking in material to get on television with Steve Martin, who was just starting as a comic. And after I get off, Mario rushes over to me and he says, "Hey, John, they're starting this morning show, news show on ABC, and you should rush over and audition." And I said, "Mario, they're going to give it to you. I mean, the Chicanos are fighting for you." He said, "John, I'm a really good reader." And he was. He had a great voice, like Orson Welles. He said, "But I can't ad lib." He says, "You do all these political jokes and you can ad lib, and it's a political show. The guy's name is Brad Lockman. Go talk to him." So I auditioned and I got the job. And oh my God, I was absolutely stunned. I mean, I was looking to be the next Jack Paar, the greatest late night talk show in the history of television. That's why I became a comedian. Now and I already had a variety show in which I put Red Fox, and now I'm on an important news show where I won my first Emmy. Anyhow, at the time, I believed the government, as did Garrison, when they said that Garrison was a kook and all of it was Oswald who killed Kennedy. But they kept getting in Garrison's way for 2 years. They wouldn't let him get into a courtroom. Now I'm on the streets when I'm 6 years of age from a street kid. And I say to my friends whom I lost, the government media is lying to us about something, because if Garrison has nothing, they want him in a courtroom, we will have fallen his ass, but they're getting in his way. So I was getting my friend's way and they got rid of him. So I sort of forgot it and concentrated. I just wanted to be the best host I could be and the best father I could be. We just had the most wonderful boy, Christopher. Anyway, one day I'm in a bookstore. It's called Larry Edmonds, and it's across from Musso and Frank's, greatest restaurant in California. And I picked this book up, Heritage of Stone. Jim Garrison's the author. And I stood there for 4 hours, Grace, and I read it. I could not believe it, the things I was reading. Jim Garrison had to sue Time Life to get the Zapruder film to be shown to a jury, and the film they sent was unviewable. So Jim sent a friend of mine and his last living surviving investigator, Steve Jaffe, to Paris, where de Gaulle gave him a copy of a polished print of the Zapruder film. And Jim Garrison got to show that to the jury. Then there was a forensic pathologist named Zink, who was called at the Clay Shaw trial in defense of Clay Shaw, but on cross-examination, he said there was no autopsy because it was stopped by generals, and the leading one being Curtis LeMay, a known hater of John Kennedy, who wanted to drop A-bombs on Vietnam and fought constantly with John Kennedy and was thrilled as were a great number of people of Washington, when John Kennedy was killed by the Central Intelligence Agency. I won't go into the business of who ordered Allen Dulles. Allen Dulles was a craftsman who crafted the killing, but he was ordered by one of the leading families, members of the leading families, who was a member of John Kennedy's cabinet, who was there to keep an eye on John Kennedy. He's the one that gave the order to an employee, and that employee was, of course, Allen Dulles, who set up the murder of John Kennedy. Anyway, reading this book, I don't put it down. The next morning, I get up early. I call New Orleans, the DA's office. I'm expecting a secretary, and it's this beautiful bass baritone voice. And I said, "Hi, my name's John Barbour. Could I please speak to Mr. Garrison?" He says, "This is he." Correct English in this beautiful voice. And I get excited again. I said, "Oh, my. I just finished reading your book, Heritage of Stone." And he chuckles, Grace, and he said, "Oh, you must be the other one. I only sold 2 copies." Now, you had to love a guy like that, okay? So I said, "Listen, I have this morning show. It's live. I would love to have you on the show for a half an hour. Then I'll open the phones, and the phones will light up because everybody wants to talk to you." And he said, "No, you won't." And I said, "What do you mean? No, I won't." He said, "John, have you ever seen me on television talking by myself?" And I said, "No." And then I said, "Oh, yeah, one time late night on NBC." And he says, "Yes, that's because NBC sent a producer down to pay $50,000 to get my leading witness a job in California out of my jurisdiction in New Orleans. We put a wire on him. And so because of equal time and the lawsuits I brought against them, I mean, NBC should have lost their license. The president of NBC and this reporter should have gone to jail. All of that stuff is in the book, and that's all in the film that you just showed, The American Media and the Second Assassination of President John F. Kennedy. And I said, "Listen, they will love you." And he said, "John, they're never going to put me on." Okay. So, and I appreciate the call. And so I say, "Listen, I just won my first Emmy." And he said, "You have plans of winning some more?" Oh my God, I love this guy. I said, "I don't know. It was just an accident." He said, "I'm so glad you read my book. I'm thrilled by the call." He said, "I got to tell you something." He says, "It's 1970. It's 4 years after the Warren Report. Did you just see this week's Harris poll?" And I said, "No, I did not." He said, 82% of Americans today do not believe Lee Harvey Oswald shot John Kennedy or acted alone. And I said, "Oh my God, if it's 82%, why aren't they storming the barricades of bullshit in New York by the millions?" And he said, "Well, you didn't see the second question." And I said, "Which will break your heart." And I said, "Well, what's the second question?" He said, "The second question is, would you like to see a really deep investigation into the murder of John Kennedy where the FBI and the CIA are investigated first?" And he said, "Guess what the percentage was?" And I said, "Well, maybe 50 or 60. He said, "No, 22%, almost none." And then he said, "What does that say about America?" And I said, "Mr. Garrison, I'll tell you what it says to me. I know what my mother and father did in the rumble seat of the car or on the pool table or in the bedroom or in the alley to conceive me. But don't ever tell me my mother's not a virgin." Well, he howled out loud. He said, "My God, you sound to me like my favorite American writer, who was Mark Twain, said that it is easier to fool people than to convince them they have been fooled. And we have been fooled since November 22nd, 1963. And he said, I only learned the truth from Hale Boggs, who was the only dissenting member of the Warren Commission. Now, Hale Boggs went before Congress, and it's in the congressional record, and said, we need to fire J. Edgar Hoover. We need to investigate the FBI and the CIA because they lied to us about the murder of John Kennedy and Martin Luther King. Hale Boggs is on record saying this in the congressional record. Now, a little later, Hale Boggs, who is very independent, gets on a plane and flies to Alaska. The plane blows up and disappears. They never find the plane or his body. And guess who drives him to the airport? I'm listening.
Who?
Bill Clinton. Bill Clinton and his wife were recruited by the CIA when they were in college, for God's sakes, and they sent him to England to become a fake Rhodes Scholar and keep an eye on anti-war protesters. That's why he is by far the most dangerous man in America, the most dangerous president this country has ever had, and one of the most charming. And it reminds me of Alfred Hitchcock. When I when I was a critic and I'd talk about Alfred Hitchcock, I never considered Alfred Hitchcock a filmmaker. A filmmaker is somebody like Stanley Kubrick or Woody Allen, those who write the films that they make. But Alfred Hitchcock never wrote anything that he made. And I said he is the Baskin Robbins of filmmakers because he does 32 flavors of the same thing, which is a mystery. Here, a cute thing about that. When he retired, they had a big dinner for him. And my wife and I were called by him personally to come to the dinner, which shocked me. And when we got there, he came and he presented me with this great mug like that. And then he says, Mr. Barbour, and then I did sell a lot of ice cream. So anyway, a lot of the people that I attacked brutally, including Neil Simon and Burt Reynolds, became the very best of my friends. And I can't go into all of it now. We don't have the time.
But they said you have to keep your enemies closer to you.
Yes, exactly. They had to be charming and handsome and witty to keep the enemies there. Now,
Yeah.
I brought up Soylent Green, so I have to mention that. It's easier to get laughs, Don Rickles proved, when you attack something. And when I was doing the reviews with on 6 o'clock news with Tom Snyder, a lot of movie stars and TV stars would come into the studio to listen to the reviews and chuckle to themselves. Anyway, when it came to Soylent Green, do you know anything about the movie that starred Charlton Heston?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay, tell the audience about it.
Well, that was a long time ago. Then it basically that Soylent Green, and the highlight is that the people started eating people also, you know.
That's exactly right. The year actually is 2022 or 2024. That's when the movie's supposed to take place. And they turn the people into crackers so we can have 3 squares a day. You're so right.
That's not going to happen. We're not going to let that happen.
Well, we don't know. You have no idea what these people do.
You're right.
But in any event, I absolutely decimated the film. Just decimated. And while I was brutalizing the film, I felt bad. And so I said to the audience, folks, people don't start out to make a bad movie. They are all well-intentioned and they're all talented, and it just doesn't somehow work out. And so I must try to find something good to say about the sets. And there's a long pause, and I said, the sets are beautiful. Well, anyway, these actors who are there listening to me just chuckle a little bit. Now I feel awful because I'm lying because it was a god awful film. And I added, but the sets would be more beautiful if they'd been placed in front of the actors. Wow, these guys in the studio starting howling with laughter. Oh my God. My news director came storming in there during the break and screaming at me, "This is not a goddamn comedy club. Shut your goddamn mouth with your jokes." And then when we went to commercial, Tom Snyder said, "Some of us will be right back." But funniest line he ever uttered. But in any event, the producer at Fox called Bob Howard, the manager, and wanted equal time. And Bob said no. Now, I'd been fired 3 times for my reviews and always brought back by Bob Howard, his wife, and public demand. But the studios hated me. The actors and directors hated me. But there were a few, like Lucille Ball, that absolutely loved me. She said, aside from the guys who write my show, John Barbour is the best writer in the world. So she and her husband used to fight over getting my reviews. Stu Shostak, who was her closest friend and converted all her video, said all she did all day long was talk about John Barbour's reviews. So in any event, the producer went to the local courts. They said no. The producers went to the California courts. They said no. Then he went to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court ruled after 5 years, they said, denied him equal time because they said John Barbour's reviews are of no public importance, which I thought was hilarious that I was the first one to announce to the world because it was making fun of myself. Now, I want to tell you one last story about movie. Do we have 5 or 10 minutes?
Yeah. And I don't know if you still want this video, but I think this video is nice, is very good too.
Oh,
So
you know what?
maybe
You know what? Wait, do
after
you
that.
mind if we close with the video? If you
Mhm.
want
Yeah.
to, oh,
Yes.
because that is so important. Oh, bless your heart. I could hug and kiss you. Anyway,
Okay.
one of the questions that Carol asked me was really smart. She says, "What was the toughest review you ever had to do?" Which is a great question. And I said, Deep Throat. Do you remember Deep Throat? Linda Lovelace? And I said, Deep Throat. And she said, well, how on earth could you possibly review Deep Throat? And I said, that's what I told my boss. I don't want to review a pornographic film, for God's sake. What can I say on the air? And my boss said, listen, Jacqueline Kennedy just saw it and talked about it. And if it's good enough for the first lady, it is good enough for you. So get your ass in there and review it. Well, I wasn't going to go alone to watch Deep Throat. So I asked my wife, who's just the greatest sport in the world, and without whom I would have never had real people, if she'd come with me. She said, okay. So the line to get in was 1.5 blocks long. And my wife has this magnificent way of just walking in front of somebody and saying, oh, thank you so much for holding my spot. Because she looked like, oh my God, she looked like a movie star. They thought she was a movie star. So we got in the front of the line. Then we get to the box office and we have to fill out pieces of paper that we're not going to sue the owner for showing this disgusting film. My wife says, I don't want to sign all this stuff. So we get into an argument. And then you get 500 people behind her yelling at her, Mrs. Barbour, goddamn it, sign the piece of paper. So she signed. We go in and I want to sit in the back and we have to bump legs with people and walk on a sticky floor. Oh my God. So what I did is I reviewed the thought of taking my wife to the movie and what we had to do to get into the theater, touching the people's knees and the sticky floor and all that disgusting stuff. And then I said, and we didn't stay long. And in my written review, I wrote why we did not stay long, but I didn't do that on the air because it was filthy. And I don't talk like that. So I thought that's the end of it. And I get a call from a lawyer in Orange County. And they said, John, they've just arrested the guy in Orange County. He screamed deep throat. And the same problem they had with Lenny Bruce, they had to call people in when he was arrested to come to his defense about free speech and the First Amendment. If I give you $500, will you come down and testify? I said, you won't give me a cent, for God's sake. Certainly I'll come down to testify. So they come down and put me in the stand. Now, the courtroom was packed, and it was packed for two reasons. One was it's a trial about deep throat. The other was that I was there. And I had already won 3 Emmys in a row. I was very, very popular in Southern California. So the place was packed. And the lawyer was really, really smart. So when he started talking to me, he asked about I want to know all about your background, Mr. Barbour. Where were you born? Toronto. Where were you born? I said, Nut City, in the Salvation Army charity ward. Okay, and what were your parents like? How did you grow up? And then I admit I didn't have any parents. My father ran away when I was 6. My mother ran away with a bunch of drunken uncles that I never saw. And so I recounted the horrors of my life, that I had come to the United States when I was 17 to be a gambler, was deported. I came a second time and I was deported. The audience absolutely loved me. Holy shit, what did this guy do to become an American? I mean, we were on the edge of their seat. And then they started talking about, now tell me about the awards you've gotten, what you're doing now. So I talked about my Emmys. I talk about my Golden Mike. I won a Golden Mike. You might not remember it. 1972, when Black Tuesday killed a dozen of Israel's athletes. Do you remember that event?
I did, and I saw a documentary film on that
Oh,
too.
okay. There's a great story about that in my book, about my attacking Johnny Carson for not talking about it, and I did. And I ad-libbed a piece called What It Must Be Like to Be a Jew in America Today. And they planted a tree in Israel with my name on it. Okay, so that story is told. And so anyway, the audience is on the edge of their seats. And he says to me, now, did you review Deep Throat? And I said, yes, of course I reviewed Deep Throat. He said, why? And I said, because I was ordered to, because the First Lady, Jackie Kennedy, saw it. So he said, well, is the review in your Los Angeles magazine the same review that you did on the air? And I said, yes, except for one thing. He says, what's that one thing? And I said, that's the last line. And he said, what is the last line? And I said, well, I don't want to mention it. I just said that on the air, I said we didn't stay long. He said, well, that's on the air. What did you put in your magazine? I said, I've been a comic for years before I got this job. I never swore on stage. The only place I think that profanity should be allowed is during golf and sex. Well, the audience just screamed. I mean, just screamed. And I said, I scream more on the golf course than I do with the other thing I just mentioned. They laughed again. I said, I can't say it. So he said, please, you have to. Then the judge leaned forward and said, Mr. Barbour, I've been on the bench for over 17 years, and I've heard the foulest things any human being could ever say. This is the worst place in the world to have hope in humanity, because I hear nothing but the worst, okay? So you can feel free to tell me what your last line was in the review. And I said, well, could you ask the question again? So I say to the lawyer, could you ask the question again? Mr. Barbour, what was the last line in your printed review in Los Angeles magazine? And there's a long pause. And I say, my wife and I left after the first 15 inches. Well, geez. Oh my God. Oh my God. You never heard such laughter in your life. I mean, people fell on the floor. They exploded. It was the biggest laugh that I have ever had. And the judge starts pounding his gavel. He says, "Case dismissed. Case dismissed." And then the lawyer, the judge says to me, "Mr. Barbour, that's the funniest, filthiest thing I've ever heard. And in any trial I've ever heard, when the jury laughs, there is never a conviction." So, so
Oh,
that's
it's perfect.
so
Perfect. Perfect.
that's one of
Perfect ending.
well,
Semi ending.
well, we're not quite ended yet. A friend of mine read this book on an airplane back to see his mother and couldn't stop laughing. And everybody in the plane kept coming over and said, "What are you reading? What are you reading?" So we sold a lot of people to passengers on the airplane. Now, oh Christ! So that is a perfect ending. Now, the really perfect ending is one of the reasons that I did not get the success that I deserved to get because of the work that I was able to do that nobody in television was able to do. I mean, Johnny Carson couldn't make films like I did. Dick Cavett couldn't make films like I did. Couldn't do shows like I did, or couldn't do interviews like I did. None of them could. But the thing that held me back is I believe in lost causes because often they're the most meaningful. And solving the murder of John Kennedy and Martin Luther King are lost causes. As a matter of fact, one of the most wonderful things I ever did, I just did last week with a genius named Leno Sanik, who is a host of Black Op Radio. Do you know who William Pepper is?
No.
William Pepper is up there with Jim Garrison. And you would say, why? He wrote a book called The Plot to Kill the King. And not only did he solve the murder of Martin Luther King, but he had lunch with the Memphis police officer who was the shooter. And
No, I
so,
remember.
okay, so what I did with Leno Sanik, I had 2 interviews of an hour or so with William Pepper 5 years ago on BBS radio. So I called them and they sent me them. So I say, I'm going to do a tribute to William Pepper because William Pepper's on his deathbed. And just before I went out to start to shoot this, I'm a non-believer, but I believe in serendipity. There's something at work in the universe, because in my book, I talk about things that are only things that are blessings from the unknown. They come from somewhere, and I don't know where they come from, but I attest to them because I'm a truth teller. So in any event, when I started the thing with Garrison, I got a phone call that I couldn't remember, and it's from Jim Garrison. He's on his deathbed. My wife came to me 2 months ago with a little tape, and she said, "Here, honey, in case you're going to be talking about Mr. Garrison with anybody, you might want this." And I listened to it, and I bawled like a baby. Here he is on the bedbed talking encouragingly to me from my deathbed. You go to my website, or you go to, it's www.johnbarbersworld.com. Not only will you see the first film, The Garrison Tapes, for nothing, play Jim Garrison's phone call to John Barbour. Well, now I do these magnificent films that are better than Oliver's movie, and thank God for his movie. I might not have made the films. And now I want to do a tribute to William Pepper, but I can't talk to him because he's on his deathbed. But I get these audio tapes, and Leno Sanik spent 60 days finding photographs and videos, Grace, that would go to the words that he was saying. We put it up about 5 or 6 days ago. It's the greatest investigative journalism in 75 years. That's what it's called on YouTube. It is a tribute by John Barbour and Leno Senick to William F. Pepper. William Pepper died 3 days ago after looking at the film.
Wow,
His
it's
wife,
perfect.
wife,
Perfect timing.
wife said he got to see that film.
Mm.
So you guys go there and look at that. And I would like to close with that wonderful, wonderful video that you showed me at the beginning,
Okay.
because the
Oh,
major reason, in spite of all my success, I had the greatest show in American history, Real People. You'd think they'd run after me to do more shows. No, there are great stories about CBS wanting me to do a reality show. Why I couldn't. Proctor Bristol Myers, got me 2 weeks late night on ABC, and I beat Letterman. And they said, listen, we want to finance a late night show with John Barbour. It doesn't cost you a nickel. And they said, no, he's too controversial. And the reason that I'm controversial, and the reason the book's not a bestseller, New York Times won't look at it because they're the ones that put out the Warren Report. And neither will the Washington Post, because they're the ones who attacked Oliver Stone with their CIA assets when he tried to make the movie JFK. So I'm blocked at the top, but I'm still doing enormously well in the subculture, which is talking to people like you and having
yeah.
word of mouth.
And it's perfect, John, because if you were, maybe what you said that they would have been all over you, or, maybe for sure, maybe I wouldn't even trust talking to you. Okay.
Well, I,
Because, I would be so, it's like unbelievable that the people who've been just like when they have handlers,
yes,
then you're with them. And
yes.
then you wouldn't be really telling the truth.
Well,
So, shall I
the,
just play this now?
yeah. Again, I want to thank you so much, because I love the fact that we're live, because all of the successful stuff I've ever done has been live because it is real. If there are mistakes, leave the mistakes up there. But the thing that stopped me was the fact that not only did I tell Jim Garrison's story, I was able to prove, because of Jim Garrison's work, those who actually murdered the President of the United States are those people who are now running and ruining this country.
Absolutely. Okay. So let's play this. And you let me know when to end, okay?
Okay, sweetheart. The murder of John Kennedy by the Central Intelligence Agency. With each passing year, his dream of a more equitable and peaceful democracy in this country becomes as dead as he is. He is dead and long forgotten. But the one man who should not be forgotten is District Attorney Jim Garrison, who not only solved the case, but is the only DA in American history, by taking on the federal government, tried to prove that no man is above the law, which we all know now is the biggest crop of crap ever dumped on America, so much so it could overfill the Grand Canyon. John Kennedy once said, "Ask what you can do for your country." In 1992, on his deathbed, Jim Garrison asked me, because of Real People and other things, if I would tell his real story to the American people, which I did in 2 definitive documentaries, and now I'm doing it again in my 3rd and final documentary called John Barbour's and William Shakespeare's Last Word on the Murder of JFK. It tells 2 parallel stories. The 53 years that I spent trying to tell Mr. Garrison's story unsuccessfully on television while trying to live my own life. Bill Hicks once said of life, "It is just a ride." Well, you get yourself to the Lemley Theater on November 22nd when this incredible one-of-a-kind documentary opens, and you will have one of the most stimulating. Okay.
Just
Uh, uh, Sadly, it didn't do that well in the theater. But if you want if you want a really fabulous, fabulous hour and a half, it does. See, in the first two films, I say I tell Jim's story. In this film, I tell my story. And the ending is unbelievable. My son is one of the co executive producers of Criminal Minds. And he said to me, Dad, that ending about William Shakespeare, how can you tie William Shakespeare into the death of John Kennedy, is one of the most brilliant, riveting pieces of acting that I have ever seen. And I'm so proud of you. Okay, so it's called John Barbour's and William Shakespeare's Last Word on the Murder of John Kennedy or JFK. You can see that free on YouTube. And Grace, again, I cannot thank you enough for just popping up on my birthday. And you're the greatest birthday gift I could ever have.
Yeah. Thank you as well, and happy, happy birthday. And yeah, I continue to look up to you, and so and others should do the same, because we don't have to stop making a big difference in our life. Every day we have an opportunity to do that, and so please make a difference. We can't just keep complaining about stuff and things, and but we have to take one step at a time. And even just this coming together on Zoom or on any kind of online. And don't, as I always say, don't let anyone take the joy out of your life. And remember to like, subscribe, and go to johnbarborsworld.com, and also to his Facebook. And John, have the best day ever. And I
Hey, Angel,
meet
you've
you
made it
someday.
the best day ever. And I'm going to tell you something else. You're going to make my 92nd birthday the best day ever, too.
Yeah.
Yes, I'll see you in a year.
Very good, very good. And someday I'll see you. You're still in the Las Vegas area, and last year I was able to go there, and I said, "Oh, but by the time I remember you're there, I left already." I said, "Next time I'll go there, I'll make sure I reach out to
Hey,
you."
listen, you must call me, and my wife and I will treat you to the greatest Italian dinner or lunch in town, okay?
Oh, thank you. Wonderful. And hugs to you, and hugs to your lovely wife and family. Take care, and do continue to do what you're doing, okay? Never stop. Take care.
I can't. I can't. I'm a junkie. I'm a truth junkie. Thank you so much. Bye bye, dear.